Thank you so much. Great to see you, Dave. It's wonderful to see you. And I'm glad you're a fan of my work that I write on Politics Web. Yes, we had that conference. It was remarkable. I loved it. I love the insights from the people. So it's an honor to be here. I had to drive from Johannesburg to get here. And it's always nice to meet people who care about the country, right? Who care about the most important issues that affect us all. So I have 15 minutes, so I'll make sure that I don't disappoint Jan, who got me here. I'll make sure that I speak below 15, maximum 15 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, do you remember? Yes, I'll talk to that now. I'm sure you remember July 21 riots, right? I'm sure you remember July 21 riots. The riots were just destructive, right? They were damaging to people's properties, right? I come from KwaZulu-Natal. Anybody from KwaZulu-Natal here? I'm from Stenga, KwaZulu-Natal, in the North Coast. July 21 riots were damaging to people, right? And they were damaging to people of all the colors. In that area where I come from, my mother would say to me, I don't understand, why are we destroying one another like this, right? Because of the damage, the impact on people's businesses. And that is why it's important for us to remember that every South African cares about their property, right? Whether it's a business, whether it's land, whether it's any asset that you have, you care and you want to own your property and want to be able to transact with it. Because that's the key, right? If you own something, if it's yours, you should be able to transact with it. That is why the focus must be on empowering South Africans of every background, the power to own land privately, to be able to transact with their land, and to ensure that their right to ownership of that land or property, they are protected. That there will never be a point where the government can just storm in and take your asset, right? And that is why this expropriation of, they call it expropriation of land without compensation or expropriation laws, that's why they're an issue. They're disturbing because we are creating a window or an opportunity where the government is just going to storm in and take over your property. No South African deserves that, right? Now, property rights for all. I've just spoken about, the July riots. That were very damaging. Okay, I'm going to go back to that later. Now, when I move to, in my observation, what concerns me right now in South Africa is that we're a nation having wrong conversations. No, this one we have here is right. This one we are gathered here for. This is the right conversation we should be having. Because it's a conversation about how do we defend our rights to our property, right? How do we push back against a state that continues to put in the laws and regulations that disadvantage us or is likely to disadvantage us in future, right? When the government storms over to take the property. We're talking about government welfare in this country, right? We have politicians and politics and some groups who are promoting government welfare. I'm not a fan of that at all. In fact, the goal should be how to reduce government welfare in the country. We shouldn't celebrate that we went from about plus minus 6 million people on government welfare in the 1990s to close to 30 million now. That must never be seen as an achievement. It must be seen as a failure. That we have leaders, political leaders, who celebrate and see that as an achievement. That tells us that something is not right. So we're having wrong conversations. Redistribution. I have argued many times that the transformation which we want and we need in South Africa, and that we should focus on, is a transformation of creation, right? How do we create more businesses? How do we expand the economy? It must support expand the economic cake. I was trained in economics at UCT and Rhodes University, right? It should be about expanding the economic cake, not how to redistribute. You look at who owns what. You look at a private company and see who owns, and therefore now government must storm in and put in regulations. That will ensure that there is a right combination of ownership as per the politician's perspective, right? The issue of land, right? There's so much. We're having the right conversation here about land because we are saying we want to defend property rights. We stand for private property rights and want to ensure that we live in a country where there's proper, property rights. But there's this obsession that only if we could have land, therefore we are going to be rich. And, we have many political movements that are pushing this idea. It's about land. The reason why we are in this situation as a country is because of land. Some people own land, some people don't. The argument is over land. This is not the 1940s, 1920s. This is the 21st century, right? Where AI is driving economic productivity around the world. We're talking about the economies of the future. Yet in the politics, we have politicians who are sort of creating an atmosphere of the 1920s. We should be talking about how do we ensure that we train our young people to have good, globally competitive education. It's about skills in the economy now. It's not about primary resources. It's not about agriculture. It's not about, it's 1920s. So the idea that we must focus on land, we should talk about the industries of the future. So we have politicians who keep saying, only if we could have land and therefore, we are all going to be rich. That's misinformation. Of course, race-based policies in the country, right? The obsession of a race-based policies, racial quotas, right? The idea that to address our socio-economic issues, therefore government needs to come up with race-based policies. That should not be the approach in the country. We must focus on building a highly skilled, competitive workforce of the 21st century. Train people, right? Entrepreneurs. It doesn't matter their color. It doesn't matter what kind of religion they are from. They must be law-abiding citizens. That's how we should think. So dwell with these race-based policies because we are already discouraging investment. As you can see, the tensions between South Africa and the US. Because the US is concerned as to, for us, if we are going to say we are going to take a 30% stake of our company and give it to some people, that's more like a tariff to us. That's how the Trump administration sees it, right? So we're discouraging investment because of all these race-based policies. There's this idea that if we don't have race-based policies, we will be worse off as a country. That's misinformation again. In fact, we'll be better off without race-based policies. Because we are giving everybody an opportunity to be productive citizens in the economy. And our politicians, they miss all of that. So we are stuck in the past in the sense of how we think could be the resolution to our socio-economic problems in the country. Right. Ramaphosa just praised Zimbabwe's disastrous land reform policies. And I was glad to hear many of the previous speakers here touching on this. My column on Politics Web, published yesterday, I wrote about this. And I asked in my column, does Ramaphosa want South Africa to be Zimbabwe? Because how do you praise what happened in Zimbabwe? A disaster. People think it was just white people that were affected because remember the whole thing was done so that you can hunt down on the white population. But you have a black middle class that left Zimbabwe. They left. Highly skilled educated people. Millions crossed over to South Africa. I mentioned in my column on Politics Web. Many of them illegally, right? So it was a problem for us as well. Food, economic productivity plunged, hyperinflation, disorder, violence, ZANU-PF, they hijacked the judicial system. It was a disaster. How do you praise that? The Mnangagwa government has begun a compensation process I've heard of them, for the farmers who were dispossessed, the white farmers, right? They are being compensated. That's what they aim. Politicians, they aim at something, and then you don't know how far they'll get it done, right? Because it was a disaster. Zimbabwe could have been better off. They could have done better without having these policies. These policies were a setback. Now our president is praising these policies. That alone tells you that we were led by people we're having a wrong conversation when it comes to the idea of property rights for all in the country. Property rights for all, or property rights and dignity. I come from KwaZulu-Natal in Stenga, the townships of Stenga, and my parents, when I grew up, all the houses we lived at, they had bought those houses, right? When I was growing up, they bought them with their low income. I come from a family that didn't have any, education of sort, right? In fact, my father had 2 years of schooling or 3 years of schooling. My mother she never set her foot at school at all, right? So I was the first one in the family, in fact, in the broader family, to go to Rhodes University to get a degree, go to UCT, get another degree. So that's the world I come from, right? But the idea of property rights and the respect for ownership of land, of no matter how small it may be. And the nice thing is that people understand there on the ground that if you are not rich, you're not going to earn a big amount of land, right? You are going to get what you can afford. People generally understand these things. That's why even the polls, when you look at the polls by the Institute of Race Relations, by Barometer as well, you send the South Africans on the ground. Forget about politics for a moment. South Africans, they understand this thing that, what's yours should be yours, right? But then, of course, we have politics that take another turn, right? In fact, polls show that South Africans, this thing of land reform is not really a priority for them in terms of government policy. The policies must focus on addressing the crime problem, service delivery, infrastructure, education, corruption. That's what the polls show, what South Africans care about. And then you have Julius Malemas of the world, kill the poor, they took our land, all these things, right? Totally, really a mismatch from how South Africans generally feel. Go to townships right now. You'll understand that in those low-income communities, people understand, they are rational in the sense that what a person owns should own, right? There is that sense. Yet in politics, people are being told something else, right? So in my experience, we've heard that we as a family, we own something. Even though it was a low-income family, we owned something, and it came with dignity, right? And that's why property rights are important for everybody, of every color, of every class. Their property rights must be respected. We must create a society where there is strong property rights. By the way, that's me in high school. I think I was doing grade 11 there. Yeah, it's a young me in KwaZulu-Natal. What concerns me, though, as I'm about to finish soon, is that financial markets and mainstream institutions aren't concerned about SA's new expropriation laws. I've worked in banking been working in, I have 3 minutes. I've been working in banking for about 10 years. As you sit through these meetings, you can see that there is very little concern over this thing. Because for them, they think that while we do have a judicial system that will sort of address the issues that may come up, so therefore it shouldn't be a concern for us. Hence, I'm grateful that we have organizations like this, people like you gathered here, because the guys who are in big business, big corporate, I have said they are complicit in the sinking of South Africa, because they keep quiet or they kowtow to ANC's government policies, right? Hence to them. Here's a slide I showed here. Banks warn against radical proposals on land expropriation. This is from 2018. This was PASA. But ever since then, for them to just to pass the message, that's it. For them, what's happening right now, I'm not seeing them speaking against it, right? And that's the challenge that we face, as to how do we get these guys to recognize that something is not right here with these things, right? And therefore, we are going to pay a price at some point. A shift in perceptions is required, especially in SA politics. Because as I just said, when you look at the polls and you talk to people on the ground, right, of every income class, there is this idea that what's yours is yours and therefore should own it, right? There is that, people, they are rational out there. Yet the politics, you have very much far left organizations that are proposing radical things that should be done at least in their view, to address our socio-economic situation, right? Which is a disconnect from how South Africans really feel on the ground, right? So that's why I'm going to end with my speech. Definitely in less than, I was on time. So it's a great honor to be here. That small thing you saw there at the left bottom is the African Markets Institute. I've just started a think tank. It's brand new, started this year. And the idea with this think tank is to really push for pro-market, pro-business policies, right, in South Africa, right? We're pushing for limited government in the country. And that's what this think tank is going to do. I do have copies of my book here, Lessons from Past Heroes. I have 20 copies of the book, so I'll be around here in case you're interested. And the book, basically, it touches a lot on what I've been speaking about here. A lot. Thank you so much.